Mob of the Dead has held a secret left undiscussed all these years later. In this video, I want to take a look back with you at one of the alternative loading screens that were given to us during Black Ops 3. Specifically, the alternative loading screen for Mob of the Dead. Each of these loading screens were changed from the originals and stuffed at the end of an issue of the Call of Duty Zombies comic book series, giving us new, vague teasers and access to information about the original maps we hadn't known before. Newtown showed us shots of the APD and Schuster on the name tag of the man running the giant drill. Kino the Totans depicted the creation of the Deceptio Fracture at the Giant. The new Nagda Untoten one even depicts Primus time traveling to Mob of the Dead. So with all of this, why am I choosing to discuss the Mob of the Dead loading screen now? I think the information contained here is likely to be relevant with Reckoning as well as the release of Black Ops 7 Zombies. Why? Well, it all stems from the STG device on Liberty Falls. We talked before on how it seems to bear a striking resemblance to Blood of the Dead's dark mechanism, and when discussing this I've always just talked about it being likely that Richtofen himself built this mechanism, and I've gotten tons of comments asking where that information comes from. And since this information is very important, as it's probably our largest clue into the identity of Panos' mysterious ally, the Grey Voice, the new Warden character that seemingly steals the essence of the original characters in the intro cutscene for Black Ops 7 Zombies that we've gotten teased to us following on from the ending of Reckoning, I think looking back at this loading screen along with the images the Weasel drew is going to be our best bet. Plus, I think the image hides a huge secret that none of us have really noticed until now. Let's dive in, starting with the loading screen. So let's start with the biggest and most obvious. What is the change here? The original Mob of the Dead loading screen is this, as you can see on screen. Putting that side by side with the new one shows that all of the changes center on the right side. The original right side page has been torn out. The original mostly featured sketches related to the Easter egg on Mob of the Dead and the AGFGX cipher. The Giant is in France, teasing origins. So it makes sense they tear it off to add new information. And now that it's gone, we get access to the next page of the Weasel's journal. The newspaper to the right of the loading screen has also changed, now featuring the Zombies in London newspaper right from the Eisendrache, rather than the prior one that helped to date the map with a stock market headline. And this new page drastically shifts what we see as the Weasel's perspective. Rather than simply a victim of the cycle and thinking he's living the same days over and over, he's actually been witness to some incredibly important events and even shaken Primus Richtofen's hand at some point. What I find most interesting and want to discuss today though is one specific part that I've never seen many people talking about. A very small detail that, once you understand it, can literally shift the entire ending of the Ether story. Before we break it down, you need to understand what we know now about the Alcatraz pocket dimension. Thanks to the radios in Blood of the Dead, we learn that Mob of the Dead, as a pocket hell dimension / liminal space, was created by the Warden of Alcatraz with help of the Shadow Man. The Shadow Man told the Warden it would be a hell dimension he could rule over for all eternity, and he would help the hordes of hell escape onto the Earth. While this was partially true, the other half of the truth was hidden from the Warden. He and the mobsters were in all actuality quite unimportant. They were trapped in a loop only to set a trap for Richtofen and the other Primus characters. The hordes of hell were really the Apothecans and the Shadowman's overlords, not the literal Satan he was posing as. It was all a trap. The Shadowman knew Richtofen would come here for the blood vials, taking advantage of the cycle that the mobsters were trapped in as an insurance policy for the battle with Monty, and for near infinite, countless cycles, it would work as planned. But then, when one day the Weasel finally managed to break the cycle the mobsters were trapped in, the plan would no longer work for Richtofen. Hence why he says the Chronorium has changed in Blood of the Dead's intro, and why they teleport into the Alcatraz pocket dimension slightly off mark as where Primus Richtofen was expecting, in the dark. The tactical insertion was slightly off. The past and future had changed. From here, we'd see the events of Blood of the Dead unfold. If the Shadowman's plan had worked, Richtofen and Primus would have stayed hooked up to the mechanism to open a permanent portal out of the Dark Ether. Instead, he sacrifices himself himself to allow the rest of Primis to escape Alcatraz and break the cycle. This is important to establish now so you can understand the perspective shift coming later. The specific segment I want to highlight is here. A small sketch of a shiv, what looks to be a toothbrush and razor blade, along with a triangle with an arrow pointing at the shiv. It seems relatively unimportant at first, but as I begin to work on breaking down this loading screen for this video, it just stuck with me. What was the odd triangle? What did it mean? Was it the Weasel instructing himself to shave the razor blade into a triangle? If so, why? It would be a less effective weapon, surely. But then it hit me. This was a triangle, yes, but it wasn't a random, meaningless triangle. It was a very specific one. The most likely meaning behind a single triangle with this shape is probably a delta symbol, a Greek letter with deep roots in mathematics. This small yet powerful symbol is used to denote a difference or variation between two values, marking the gap between an initial and a final state, making it a cornerstone for expressing change. For instance, in physics or calculus, triangle X might represent the change in position over time, providing a clear measure of movement or transformation. In the context of the Mob of the Dead updated loading screen, this visual cue resembling a delta symbol could carry a similar implication. Given its frequent use to signify change in formulas, it might suggest a transformation, shift, or change of some kind. Combining that with the fact it is pointed at a shiv, something used to stab someone in prison, we can make an interesting assumption. Let's take a look back at the story of the mobsters, what is holding their cycle, and thusly, the cycle of the Ether story at large together here. Let's listen to the radios.
My name is Stanley Ferguson. I was a guard at Alcatraz from 1933 to 1942. Today, I'm going to give you some insight into one of the more interesting tales from the prison's history. Over the decades, Alcatraz has seen more than its fair share of daring escape attempts. However, few were as audacious as the one undertaken by 4 inmates on New Year's Eve, 1933. Thought to be the brainchild of an inmate by the name of Albert Arlington, the outrageous scheme was as unlikely as its mastermind. It's believed that Arlington, aka the Weasel, somehow convinced 3 other inmates that he had devised a foolproof plan to escape the rock. It was a plan that would see them literally taking to the skies on a makeshift aircraft of Arlington's own design. Just how the Weasel managed to convince these hardened criminals that such a plan was even possible remains a mystery to this day. What is known is that no such plane was ever built. Instead, the group's plans for freedom soon descended into bitter argument and infighting. With the plan falling apart, anger and frustration would ultimately lead to a brutal altercation between the misguided Arlington and his former co-conspirators. Armed only with makeshift weapons, Finn O'Leary, Sal DeLuca, and Billy Handsome lured the unsuspecting Arlington to the roof, where they intended to exact a bloody and violent revenge. And so it was here, beneath the dark and stormy winter skies, that the hapless Arlington met his grisly end, bleeding to death on the cold concrete roof. For their participation in the murder, the 3 collaborators were sent to death by electric chair. Justice came swiftly. On the morning of January 19th, 1934, the execution order was carried out.
So, the other 4 stabbed Weasel. Why, obviously, they used a shiv, just like the one depicted in the image. So, what would a delta symbol with an arrow pointing at shiv mean then, if the Weasel drew it? It seems to me then that this is some visual instruction to change the events of the stabbing. Essentially, instructions to break the cycle. Why is this so earth-shattering for the finale of the Ether story, though? This drastically shifts some character arcs. At first, we assume that the Weasel eventually discovered how to break the cycle on his own. Sometime after an innumerable amount of loops, he managed to hold his ground against the other 3 and reverse the events of that fateful day which trapped them there. This would mean that Richthofen did not plan for the Weasel to ever break this cycle. It was depending upon its existence for his plan to work. However, it not working ended up as what seemed to be a happy accident for Richthofen, allowing him to break the cycle throughout Black Ops 4 afterwards. However, looking at the sketches on this page, we see this instruction written to himself to break the cycle, showing exactly how to do so. This means the plan was not nearly as spontaneous as we thought, and the real implications come when you look at what it is surrounded by. Surrounding this sketch is the blood vials, and the two different pictures of Primus Richthofen, one of him near the pods, one of which shows Primus Richthofen emerging from a portal in Alcatraz, and one shows him shaking hands with another man. Now, some people will point to the handshake bringing Primus Richthofen and Stanley Ferguson. We know Ferguson worked with the Illuminati to build the laboratory. However, a far more interesting possibility is that the man Richthofen is meeting here is actually the Weasel himself. And it's hard to make out in this sketching. All we can really see is his hat, and it does kind of resemble Stanley Ferguson's hat if you compare them side by side. Of course, it's nothing like the Warden / Brutus's helmet, but that's been another idea. But honestly, it does kind of match with the Weasel's hat as well. Interestingly enough, we can of course collect it on Revelations, which we never really understand why, but this shifts our perspective entirely if this is actually the case. This would mean Albert Arlington, the Weasel, didn't just fall for the Shadow Man's trap in Blood of the Dead and quickly decide to sacrifice himself without warning. He knew that someday, some loop, this would happen and the cycle would break. And it wasn't just a lucky coincidence the Shadow Man planned for it to happen. It was always Richthofen's plan from the start. Perhaps he had simply never anticipated the Weasel to be successful, an insurance policy within an insurance policy. This takes Richthofen at arguably his weakest moment in the storyline and once again elevates him to a tactical, tragic genius. His sacrifice in Blood of the Dead feels so much more powerful if you consider the idea he is the one who specifically set it up in the first place, knowing it would happen some way but putting it off over and over and over again. He is just ultimately let down by the fact that even though he may well have to set the Weasel up in a crazy 4D chess move, he wasn't willing to commit to it when it involved giving his own life. At this point, I'd like to bring up something else that was present in Blood of the Dead that was discussed a bit during Black Ops 4's life cycle, but never really amounted to much. In the wider context, I think we can actually piece this together even more. So, throughout Blood of the Dead, we can find various drawings done and hidden by the Weasel. It's not exactly certain when he did these, as some of them seem to be depicting future events, but at least to me, it seems like he might have drawn them during his imprisonment within the loop there. As time is odd within a cycle, of course, and paradoxical, it's entirely possible that he was able to glimpse future events in this way. Mob of the Dead actually hinted towards that, with the Weasel, quote,
Nikolai. Why do I keep hearing that name?
So let's jump into breaking down the pictures and what they mean. The first two images show the Warden in his Brutus form, and then the Weasel himself as a spirit, Icarus the bird, flying over the lost souls of Alcatraz. These are obviously two things we see quite prominently in Blood of the Dead. He was seeing the future, the eventual outcome in this broken cycle. The next image is one that a fair few players have definitely seen, but perhaps not known what to make of. The drawing clearly shows Ultimus Richthofen emerging through a portal with the text, "Who the hell are you?" The last two drawings may not have been seen by too many people, however. These last two images clearly show people escaping Alcatraz by boat. This is bizarre for a few reasons. Firstly, Alcatraz was notorious for never being escaped, at least not at that point in history. The blood written on the map literally being, "No one escapes alive." There were a few successful escapes later on, but it's not clear how these would relate to anything he is foreshadowing or the zombie storyline. Instead, it seems to me that these are possibly depicting some sort of events we don't see, perhaps metaphorically even. In the first, we see two men leaving by boat. In the second, we see one man arriving in San Francisco by boat, with the Golden Gate Bridge clearly in view and a seagull overhead. Immediately, my mind jumps to the mysterious boat at the secret Easter egg in Tag the Totem. For years, this strange rowing boat has had no meaning, and its only use is to allow players to teleport back to Siberia from the surface of Mars's moon Phobos. What I wonder then is it possible that the boat is some sort of method, either literally or more likely metaphorically, to travel between dimensions? One important piece of information we get in Blood of the Dead is that if one of the characters were to touch the water, they would essentially be erased from existence, as the pocket dimension ends at the limit of the island. This makes me think that these images are more metaphorical, perhaps the Weasel's attempt to interpret future events he doesn't understand. If we take a look at the images again, we can actually figure out what order they happened in thanks to what they are actually doing. Rowing. When you row, you face the opposite direction to the way you are going, obviously. So the first image is actually the man rowing towards Alcatraz, with the second being the two men leaving. It's so interesting yet frustrating, as clearly Treyarch were trying to communicate something by this, but it just feels like we are missing a puzzle piece. A theory I'm going to put forward now is one that I like, but think that there may still be more to go on. Premise Richtofen, of course, has the Dimension 63 Illuminati build the laboratory underneath Alcatraz. That's how it's set up, as we know. The thing is though, the Illuminati likely understand more about the dimensions than it would seem, as they are able to create the stasis pods that are connected across dimensions to the Broken Arrow drill, and even mock the Warden for his lack of understanding about the Shadow Man. We have a quote in the map too, suggesting that the Warden himself has no way of understanding how to build the Pack-a-Punch machine, let alone something like the Dark Mechanism. The chalkboard in Richtofen's lab even suggests that Premise Richtofen doesn't even understand how it works, and attributes its design to someone else. It literally says, how did he do this? No fail-safes? Madness. We have an image of someone getting taken off the island covertly before someone returns, potentially metaphorically, and we have the image of Ultimus Richtofen appearing out of the blue there. What I and other people have suggested over the years is that, essentially, Ultimus Richtofen was responsible for assisting the Illuminati in building elements of the lab. We know it was hinted at in the Blundell era that Richtofen was totally separated from Ultimus at one point in time, and they instead fought with Gersh, the bald man on the poster for the map. So this could fit very neatly into that gap. He would explain the madness that was clearly associated with the Dark Mechanism, and explain why it bears such a striking resemblance to Group 935 teleporter technology. The boat could have been one of the times he literally arrived on the island, either before it was a pocket dimension or a metaphor for him teleporting there, with the other man perhaps being Stanley Ferguson or another Illuminati associate. It's also incredibly interesting to point out that if the lab and Broken Arrow's drill are connected, the drill was operated by Dr. Schuster, who could be considered Ultimus Richtofen's only real friend in the entire storyline, and a man whose life he went out of his way to save in the closing days of World War II, by ensuring he went to America and not the Soviet Union. So Ultimus Richtofen could very easily visit Schuster and convince him to participate in this big interdimensional plan. And even inside the laboratory itself, you can teleport the walnut, which the walnut is what started all of the fracturing and the time dilation and eventually led to the teleporters being created, and this was Richtofen and Schuster's project that Maxis deemed a waste of time. Just like with the handshake earlier on, it seems like all the important characters' coverage on Alcatraz. We already have literally 3 Richtofens in the room during the opening. The one after Grod Crovey and Revelations, who gets sent back to the Great War and then teleports himself to Alcatraz and is secretly frozen. The one who arrives from Zetsubo no Shima with the rest of the crew for the pit stop for the blood vials, and the one who leaves after finding out the chronorium has changed and handing it to the other Premise Richtofen. He teleports out. Presumably this is in the gap between Origins and the Giants, but I guess we don't really know when this Richtofen is from. Presumably he goes on to complete the final cycle and then sends himself back here, and maybe this is the same as the Great War Richtofen. It's a bit unclear. The one question remains then, why? Why would Ultimus Richtofen collaborate in building the lab? The answer is obvious. They all want to break the cycle. They just have different views on how. Premise Richtofen gives Al instructions to break the loop on Alcatraz, but never expects him to be successful, and even if he was, we'll just assume he can walk out and he wouldn't literally be left there to die by his other self. Ultimus Richtofen, far more familiar with the Shadow Man and his plans, after touching the MPD and becoming infected with the many voices of corruption, likely having a greater understanding of the cycle as a whole, and the overall building blocks of the ether, builds the mechanism as the ultimate escape device, using the most powerful thing in the universe, his own blood and the power source. It makes sense that Ultimus Richtofen would have much greater knowledge of the cycle, which is why he's not surprised in Tag Tone's ending when Nikolai poisons the rest of the characters and he remains as the zombified zombified version of himself, and Nikolai then of course shoots him in the head. He literally has no reaction, like he knew this day would be coming eventually, and he accepted his fate in the end. But that's the gist of what I wanted to say on the Mob of the Day loading screen in this video. Let me know your thoughts down below. Of course, this is all very ambiguous, there's many ways to interpret this, but this is what I'm settling on right now. Feel free to disagree in the comments below, as always. Anyways, thank you for watching the video, make sure to subscribe if you're not for the latest and greatest Call of Duty news information. So anyways, thank you for watching, and bye. To conclude this video, I want to shout out the fact that I finally decided to make a Patreon and Cameo account, both of which will be linked below if you want to help support the channel. On Patreon, you can sign up for the lowest tier of just $1.50 a month to get exclusive access for my Discord, where we can discuss zombies lore, trivia, or whatever you desire. A place where you lot, my community, can better connect. Your names will also appear at the end of videos thanking you. For $5.50 a month, you get all of that, and I will be doing exclusive monthly Q&As. And for $16.50 a month, you again get all of that, and I will be doing exclusive lore videos, such as unpacking niche parts of the Treyarch documents I've been breaking down on my channel that don't as much suit a main channel video. For the highest tier, only for those with the ability to and who really want to help out the channel, you get special bonuses I've yet to determine and verbal shoutouts at the end of every video. Over on Cameo, I can do funny videos reading lines from zombies, memes like how do we tell him, birthday wishes for friends or family, or whatever else you desire, practically anything. Of course, none of this is necessary, just watching and enjoying the videos helps me immensely and I greatly appreciate it. However, I think it's about time I start setting up additional revenue streams because Zombies' popularity is tumultuous and always goes through ups and downs. As I'm sure you've lately seen on the channel, viewership is down a lot. We go through big highs when new games release, but then during these drought periods, I need more income stability so I don't have to worry as much about it and I can focus more on improving the quality of the content. My highest quality videos are not always the ones that best please YouTube algorithms, so instead, this way I can produce my best work knowing I don't have to think as much about how well the content's going to perform. So if you'd like to support me on Patreon for exclusive content or would like a simple Cameo message, you can do so to further support me via the links below, but only if you can afford it and you actually want to help me. Don't feel like you are forced to, don't worry, I'll survive. It would just help relieve some of the pressure during inconsistent periods on the channel, so I don't have to solely rely on AdSense revenue and still maintain the sheer quantity and quality of content that I put out. Obviously, I pump out literally a boatload of content, and some of these are absolutely crazy projects over hour-long videos, so it's a lot on my plate, especially when these videos don't perform particularly well. And I've not been doing many sponsorships lately to help supplement revenue either, so it would greatly help. Thank you for any generous person once again who does kindly support the channel. It means the absolute world and will really help keep this boat afloat.